Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 4th of April 2016, the podcast that says wop pop 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 pow. This is your host, Shane Killian, and joining me again is Chris Hangartner. Chris, welcome back to the podcast.
It's good to be back.
Hope you had an excellent Easter holiday or spring break or whatever it was for you.
Yeah, it was good.
Let's theobromanize the news of the bogus. So the whole big deal government is making after recent terrorist attacks like the one in Paris is, and this is really just an excuse, we've covered this before, how encryption is so horrible and we need governments to put in backdoors. You know the spiel by now.
This again?
Well, it turns out the Paris terrorists didn't use encryption at all. They used burner phones.
Yep, typical example.
So according to the New York Times, quote, the three teams in Paris used only new phones that they would then discard, including several activated minutes before the attacks or phones seized from their victims.
Yeah, the thing is, people fail to realize that's a common strategy that most criminals use, especially like bank robbers. They don't, use like these highly encrypted, protected, files to lay out their plans. They just use disposable phones and laptops, and then once the act is done, they destroy them and erase everything.
Yeah, and one of the things that happened immediately after the attacks was they found a phone in a trash can, and according to the investigators, quote, it had a Belgian SIM card that had been in use only since the day before the attack. The phone had called just one other number belonging to an unidentified user in Belgium.
Oh, this is the Brussels attack?
Oh, no, this is the Paris attack.
Oh.
Yeah. It was a Belgian phone.
Which actually adds another point. That proves that a solution to this isn't to end Syrians, coming into Europe.
Oh, yeah, it only took them a couple of microseconds to do that.
Yep, the bodies weren't even cold.
But they said, quote, everywhere they went, the attackers left behind their throwaway phones, including in Bobigny, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, at a villa rented in the name of Ibrahim Abdeslam. Okay, guys, you're going to have to start giving me names I can pronounce here. When the brigade charged with sweeping the location arrived, it found two unused cell phones still inside their boxes. At another location used by one of the terrorists, the police found dozens of unused burner phones still in their wrappers.
Yep. It doesn't take a genius to figure this out, people,
And when they went looking on these phones, they didn't find a single email or text or online chat message or anything like that. They were just using phone calls.
Yep, when they're done, they can just wipe them and then be forgotten about it.
Yeah, so there wasn't really any role that encryption played in these attacks. Now, there is one part of this that I really have to call Bogosity on. This is really stupid. And this is supposedly the New York Times saying, evidence encryption was being used elsewhere. A witness reported seeing a terrorist with a laptop and told the investigators that as the computer powered up, she saw a line of gibberish across the screen. It was bizarre. He was looking at a bunch of lines like lines of code. There was no image, no internet. Her description matches the look of certain encryption software which ISIS claims to have used during the Paris attacks.
Yeah, that's Bogosity for two reasons. One, we don't know if the story is true because that's just an eyewitness testimony. And second of all, even if it is, my computer does that when I start it up sometimes.
It sounds exactly to me like Linux booting up.
Yeah, that's... a lot of computers do that.
I mean, even a Windows system might run check disk every now and then,
Yeah, it's just checking the disk to make sure everything's ready to go when it turns on.
But if it was encryption, it wouldn't look like lines of code. It would look like pseudo-random noise. That's the whole point of encryption.
Yeah, as you said, it would look like a random string of numbers and letters.
Yeah, and probably other characters as well, depending on how it was encoded.
Yeah.
Well, you can probably guess what happened next. Now, Congress wants to mandate registration of all prepaid cell phones.
Oh, jeez.
And this is Representative Jackie Speier, a Democrat with California's 14th District. That's the San Francisco and the Bay Area.
Oh, this was the Democrat Party?
Oh, of course it was!
I thought the Democrats were supposed to be against this kind of thing.
What are you talking about? Have you been paying any attention to what Obama's been doing?
I know, but it's just a joke. I mean, I remember, when the Bush administration proposed some of these things during the tax, the Democrats like, no, you can't do that. It's an infringement on our freedoms and liberties. And then when Obama took over and did the same thing, they were quiet.
No, you don't understand. Their surveillance is an infringement on our liberties. Our surveillance is necessary and only a traitor would be against it.
Yeah.
So yeah, Spire has introduced legislation that would require prepaid phone retailers to collect information on the buyer when one of these prepaid phones is purchased, including name, address, and date of birth, which will be verified by a credit card, social security number, or driver's license number. So this is called the Closing the Prepaid Mobile Device Security Gap Act of 2016. They love that word, gap.
Oh, yeah.
Makes it sound like, ooh, we're just filling in a gap. This is like a little problem we're just,
It's another buzzword.
Yeah. It's also HR 4886. And supposedly this would help track terrorists and other serious criminals when they would no longer be able to purchase without identification. But how's that going to work? As we just covered, they only use the phone for like an hour or a few minutes before the attack. You don't have time to do anything else.
Yep, there's a great quote. Now, this refers to military wars and all that, but I think it could easily apply to a lot of these laws, which is where amateurs think weapons and tactics, generals think strategy and logistics, because the truth is that there's many laws out there that sound good on paper, but logistically speaking, there's no way to enforce them and all that.
But, I mean, think about what the terrorists are going to do now. When they buy these prepaid phones, they're just going to use a fake ID.
Oh, yeah.
The 9/11 terrorists had fake IDs. They even had fake pilot's licenses.
And then you're going to say, well, then we're going to introduce, a better ID system. They'll find a way around that. We say this all the time to people. We say this for guns and other prohibition. Prohibition and regulation only stops the common folk from doing it. It doesn't stop the criminal.
Or like the previous story said, phones that they seized from their victims. So how are you going to stop that? And what about phones purchased in other countries? Because you can pass a law saying that if it's bought in America, you have to do this, but what if people hop the border to Mexico or buy it in Iran or wherever?
Yep.
Or purchase it off the black market?
Yep, that's the one thing that a lot of these lawmakers keep forgetting. There is a thing called the black market, and if you ban some sort of equipment, for criminals to use, they'll just get it from sources.
Well, and it's not about keeping us safe. It's never been about keeping us safe. It's about surveillance.
Yep, Big Brother wants to know what you're doing.
And it's also like you were saying a minute ago about how reactive our government is towards this. We've talked about this before. A guy tries to blow up his shoes on a plane. Now you make people take off their shoes before boarding a plane, but they were never going to try that a second time. Even if you don't inspect shoes, they'll just think of something else. You're just closing a barn door where there are no more horses.
We see the same thing with mass shootings. Every time there's a mass shooting, before the bodies are even cold, there's all these people saying, this is why we need to ban military weapons from civilians.
So I'm linking to an article from security expert Bruce Schneier, and this is from way back in 2006, called Focus on Terrorists, Not Tactics. Again, mirroring what you were saying earlier. And this was written after the terrorists who were planning to detonate liquid explosives were arrested, and now we can't bring anything on that's more than like 3.4 ounces or something like that.
Yep.
So what he says is, quote, none of the airplane security measures implemented because of 9/11, no-fly lists, secondary screening, prohibitions against pocket knives and corkscrews had anything to do with last week's arrest, and they wouldn't have prevented the planned attacks had the terrorists not been arrested. A national ID card wouldn't have made a difference either.
Oh, yeah. That's the thing that a lot of these politicians either seem to forget or they just flat out ignore, is that most terrorist attacks are unsuccessful either because their plan fails or they were actually stopped, ironically, by civilians, not by the security.
And he goes on to say, quote, instead, the arrests are a victory for old-fashioned intelligence and investigation. Details are still secret, but police in at least 2 countries were watching the terrorists for a long time. They followed leads, figured out who was talking to whom, and slowly pieced together both the network and the plot.
Oh, yeah, and this is actually something interesting that was brought up, because I heard this happen with 9/11, is that you'll soon get a tip that does say there's going to be an attack, here's what's going to happen, but it gets lost in the noise.
Yeah, I mean, you're just trying to find a needle in this enormously large haystack. And their solution is, well, we need to make the haystack bigger.
Yep, Michael Shermer pointed this out. A lot of, 9/11 conspiracy theories like to say, yeah, well, did you know that the UK found information that there was going to be a terrorist attack in New York in 9/11 and the US government did nothing? Yeah, because that was just one piece out of several thousand pieces they had.
Quote, banning box cutters since 9/11 or taking off our shoes since Richard Reed has not made us any safer, and a long-term prohibition against liquid carry-ons won't make us safer either. It's not just that there are ways around the rules, it's that focusing on tactics is a losing proposition. It simply forces the terrorists to make a minor modification in their plans. There are too many targets: stadiums, schools, theaters, churches, the long line of densely packed people before airport security, and too many ways to kill people.
Remember, Timothy McVeigh in the 90s when he carried out the Oklahoma City bombing, he used a fertilizer bomb. Guess what? Almost all the materials he used are still legal and they can be easily purchased. We can still buy fertilizer, we can still buy nitro fuel, and we can still rent U-Haul trucks. And have we seen a massive increase of anarchists blowing up government buildings by that? Not really.
Quote, security measures that require us to guess correctly don't work, because invariably we will guess wrong. It's not security, it's security theater. Measures designed to make us feel safer, but not actually safer. Airport security is the last line of defense, and not a very good one at that. It won't catch a well-planned plot. We can't keep weapons out of prisons. We can't possibly keep them off airplanes.
That's what I hate about people who say the government can do it. It's like, look, I don't trust the government to run my mail service or all that, so what makes you think that we should trust their lives to them with security and like that?
Well, I don't think there's much room for doubt anymore. Our government officials don't want us safer. They want us further at risk so that we can be scared, so that they can justify even more intrusive policies. They're the real terrorists.
Oh, yeah. And the sad truth is that they've been doing this for decades. They did it during World War I, they did it during World War II, they did it during the Cold War. The enemy's still changed, but the idea's still there.
So we'll leave off for this story on a word of hope from Bruce Schneier. Quote, if you want to know what you can do to help, don't be terrorized. They terrorize more of us if they kill some of us, but the dead are beside the point. If we give in to fear, the terrorists achieve their goal even if they were arrested. If we refuse to be terrorized, then they lose, even if their attacks succeed.
Kind of funny about terrorism because, the best defense I've heard that we can do with a terrorist attack is it's not to get scared and all that, it's just to mourn the dead when it happens and then move on with your life because you don't get a reaction. Terrorists in a way are like bullies. If you don't give them a reaction, then they realize, well, what's the point in going after them if we're not going to get the reaction we want?
Well, that's why Gandhi's tactics work so well. If he had let his group be radicalized and fought back with violence, they would have lost.
Here's a fun thing I've actually heard about Gandhi. I've actually heard that in his youth he was kind of like that, and the reason why he switched was because when he was in South Africa, he had a similar mentality, and he found out it didn't work.
Yeah, and then he switched over to the idea of just non-compliance when he had all their passes and he was burning them in public, and they'd whack him and beat him, in front of the crowd to make an example of him, and the only thing he would do after being beaten is pick up some more of the passes and put him in the fire, and they beat him down, and he would just keep going over that again until he literally couldn't stand anymore.
And it's good for PR because in the eyes of people who are watching it, the people you're fighting against are looking like the aggressor,
Yeah, they're the aggressors, they're the bullies, and that's all you're pointing out.
Hi, I'm Dave. You may recognize me from previous Bogosity episodes. I'm also part of a podcast, the Superplugs Brothers Podcast. Head on over to superplugsbros.com. You can check out the podcast for video games and pro wrestling. We also have news, reviews, and editorials and all kinds of stuff just to talk about video games and pro wrestling and everything else that comes in between. So if you're into that, why don't you come check us out?
Hey Chris, I got a joke for you.
Oh.
What did socialists use before candles?
Nothing.
Electricity. It's an old joke, but it's one that's actually playing out in Venezuela. They shut down their electrical grid for a week over Easter to help deal with the electricity crisis.
Yeah. I still can't believe assholes like Sean Penn say that everyone should copy Venezuela.
Yeah, that's really a model I'm looking at and saying, yeah, that's great, isn't it?
Yeah. Because I was watching this program about the old Soviet Union where there were still a lot of socialists saying that, while I don't agree with everything the Soviet Union does, I do think we should copy their welfare system and all that. And then when the Berlin fall and we actually went in there, we discovered that the Soviet Union wasn't all that it was cracked up to be.
But I mean, this is the same story. Rationed electricity, rationed water. They're blaming it on the drought, which it's kind of funny because when you have a free market, you end up being able to deal with the drought.
That's the thing that socialists are good at. It's blaming others for their problems,
Yep, they're blaming it on the weather and sabotage by their political foes.
Oh, yeah.
You gotta have a scapegoat.
Yep.
But it's no different here. Foreigners, immigrants, the patriarchy, rich white people, whatever. It's the same kind of thing. Democrats blame Republicans, Republicans blame Democrats. You gotta have someone to point to and blame, because otherwise people will blame the person who's really responsible, and that's most likely you.
Shane, why are you blaming the victims?
Yeah.
I still can't believe people are making that argument.
Well, it's like, one of the reasons I was down for this whole week is because on Monday our power went out for like 4 hours, and it was this whole end of the county. Something like 8,000 people were without power for several hours. And I never did find out definitively what caused it. Some reports had said it was someone hitting a power pole. I'm a little iffy about that because I don't see how that would take it down for so many people. But regardless, it's the fact that it's all one grid, it's all managed by, the government monopoly, and so when something like that happens...
Oh, yeah. It's funny because some socialists like to use the power company as an example of, capitalistic, monopolies, even though the reason why is because they won the privilege.
Would capitalists have ever set up a power grid like that where one tiny problem takes it down for thousands of people?
Yeah.
Capitalism works by being decentralized, where you have multiple sources of power and multiple ways of delivering that to the people.
Oh, yeah.
And they say, well, that's waste. See how wasteful capitalism is? Well, geez, at least we don't have rolling friggin' blackouts. The last time I think we saw rolling blackouts on a large scale in this country was California. Way back, I guess that was about 15 years ago or something like that, when they had said, okay, you have to jump through all these hoops to build new power plants, and you're not allowed to bring in power from out of state, but we're going to cap what you can charge for power. And what happened? That's a shortage. That's rolling blackouts.
Yep. California is the Venezuela of the United States because, California and Venezuela are proper examples of how you do not run a country, but yet, just like Venezuela, what happens to California when, their policies backfire? They blame it on something else.
Even though the mechanism that the free market uses, which is increasing the price, they say, ooh, that's price gouging and that's terrible, as if forcing people to go a week without power isn't just as bad. But what the higher price does is it encourages people to economize on their own and cut back on the power consumption, while at the same time encouraging new sources of power to come in.
Yeah, I mean, if things become more expensive, it makes people think and say, do I really need this, or can I get by without it?
But this in Venezuela, it's at the Guri Dam, which is pretty much their main source of power, and the drought has meant that the water levels just aren't what they were, and the way hydroelectric power works is the lower the water level is, the less pressure is going through the turbine, so it doesn't turn them as fast, so you don't generate as much power.
And that's another reason why I say capitalism is better than socialism, is that because socialists, the biggest problem that they have is that they tend to pick an idea and they stick with it, whereas in a capitalist society, if they stick with an idea, but then that idea either fails or something better comes along, they go with it, No wonder why they're having power outages, because nobody's has the incentive to think, let's find a more, efficient way to make power and all that. I will say this to all you rich Hollywood celebrities, stop defending Venezuela. It's not the utopian country you think where everyone has a lollipop.
No, it's the evil capitalists. They're the ones to blame.
Yeah.
Hackers, terrorists, the NSA. But I repeat myself. Your online security is under attack, and the weakest point is your password. That's why you need LastPass. LastPass plugs into your browser and allows you to randomly generate strong, unique passwords anywhere on the web, all protected by one master password. LastPass sets up in minutes and gives you secure automatic logins throughout the web, synchronizing across all your browsers and all your computers, at home, at work, or on the road. It even securely stores sensitive form data, including credit card numbers, backup sensitive documents, membership info, Wi-Fi logins, and more. And with LastPass Premium, you can get these benefits on other applications and even mobile devices, and also get priority customer support. Sign up at password.bogosity.tv for a free month of LastPass Premium. Log in securely everywhere using the last password you'll ever have to remember. Go to password.bogosity.tv and get LastPass now. Well, the march for marijuana legalization not only moves on, it's taken a huge step forward. Recreational marijuana has passed the House in, of all places, Texas.
Wow.
It still has a long way to go, but really, this is like Nixon going to China.
Oh, but I thought Texas was the home of those racist rednecks.
Well, it's the home of those, horrible Christians, and yet the bill's author says that it's his Christian values that are causing him to introduce the bill, and now he's got bipartisan support for it.
Yep. It's pretty funny. It's another example about how, because, I'm not saying Texas is perfect, but Texas is a lot more freer than a lot of other states, and it shows how things get done there,
Texas is a lot more diverse than people give it credit for being.
Oh, yeah. I know people from Texas, and trust me, they are not those hick rednecks you think they are.
Well, some of them are, but yeah.
You want hick rednecks, go to Mississippi.
But it's like you go even like 10 miles away in Texas and you see completely different people.
Oh, yeah.
So this is Republican David Simpson of Longview. He's a conservative politician backed by the Tea Party, and he says it was his belief in God, distrust of government, and criticism of the war on drugs that led him to sponsor the bill. Quote, "As a Christian, I recognize the innate goodness of everything God made and humanity's charge to be stewards of the same. I don't believe that when God made marijuana, he made a mistake the government needs to fix."
Yeah, I'm trying to stay positive and all that, but it really just makes my jaw drop knowing that we are now living in a society where it's the conservative Republicans that are starting to make a little more sense. Now, they're not perfect, but they're starting to sound more rational than we used to give them credit for.
But this is how it's always happened in this country with things like slavery or alcohol prohibition. Initially, you have all the religious leaders in favor of slavery, in favor of prohibition, and they cite the Bible for support. And then, as more and more people turn against it, more and more religious people turn against it, and then you get these high-ranking religious people, either in government or in churches or whatever, they start citing their Christian values as the reason why, and then after that, it's just a matter of time.
Oh yeah? You want to know something? Contrary to popular belief, there were some religious people in favor of communism and socialism.
Yep. But, it's just all about this is how the trend goes, and so I think we're really seeing a tipping point here.
It's not about the isms, it's about the power.
Now you can make Amazon purchases with Bitcoin by going to purse.bogosity.tv. That's P-U-R-S-E. Moreover, most purchases can be made at a discount. Save an average of 20% just by buying from Purse, or get even greater discounts by linking your Amazon wish list. Go to purse.bogosity.tv. Bogosity.tv is a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates Program, an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for sites to earn advertising fees by advertising and linking to Amazon.com. Just clear your cookies and go to amazon.bogosity.tv, or check the right-hand side of the podcast page for Amazon's best deals, including the deal of the day and limited-time lightning deals on all sorts of great products. So next time you buy online, go to amazon.bogosity.tv. And now it's time to de-overnumerize this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this week, it goes to the state of New York surrounding their Bitcoin regulations known as BitLicense. We covered this when it first started, and people were speculating that it was just a surreptitious way to kill the currency, but oh no, they were just conspiracy theorists. Government would never do that. There'll be all sorts of businesses safely using Bitcoin in a nicely regulated environment. Just you wait. Well, okay. We waited, and now, almost a year later, out of the dozens of applicants, the New York State Department of Financial Services has granted a BitLicense to a grand total of one of them.
Oh, wow.
And then there are something like 21 others that are operating under a safe harbor provision, which is the provision in the law that says, okay, while you're waiting, you can go ahead and use it, but they're still waiting for a formal confirmation, and then if it comes through that they're denied, they're going to have to rework their whole business model.
Yeah.
And you've even got people like Coinbase. I mentioned them before. If you donate via Bitcoin to Bogosity, it goes through Coinbase. And there's another storage specialist, Zappo. They're still being processed. They're still waiting. And these are just huge Bitcoin companies.
Yep. But that's New York for you. Yep, that's New York. We want to keep companies like Walmart out so our big cronies don't get harmed.
And everyone is just reporting mixed success. You have NYDFS Executive Deputy of Communications Richard Lacan saying, quote, applications vary very, very widely in terms of the type of applicants and information provided. We're working with many applicants rather than outright rejecting them to provide information we need. Why don't you just let them use Bitcoin? That's what I don't get.
Oh yeah, that's what happens. That's what happens. They only approve, one or two people to use the system, and then everyone complains, oh, it's a monopoly, and then they introduce more rules and regulations to punish those evil capitalist monopolies.
And that's why it's disheartening to see. I won't go through them, but if you look through this article on CoinDesk, you see a lot of people, well, it's great that they're working with us on it to try and make it as smooth as possible. It's like, do you not realize that they're making your chains more comfortable?
Yeah.
Yes, your chains are nicely padded and have that furry stuff on it so they don't chafe. Yeah, that's really nice of them.
Yeah, but you're still in chains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's just so much confusion over things like that. You have Jesse Powell, the founder of Kraken, and he said that the cost of a bit license wasn't worth the benefits of doing business in New York. And he acquired CoinSetter, which was based in New York City. And he said that the company's pending bit license wouldn't transfer. And he says, well, I'm not even going to bother reapplying.
Oh, yeah, that's how it is. There's a lot of people that still like to say that we need government to protect monopolies, and they blame, capitalism on this. And here's what I say to the ultimate defense people, in going back to the power companies, it's like, if you still don't believe that that the cable companies and all that are being jerks because of government, here's what I say. Get yourself one of those independent relay systems and start your own independent cable company and see what happens.
Exactly. So you have former deputy counsel for the NYDFS, Dana Syracuse, who really made the terrible excuse that the process isn't that different from traditional money service business license, MSB license. Well, that just means your MSB licenses are terrible.
Yep, that's what they all say.
I mean, if it's no different and it's this terrible, that's that much worse for the regular MSB license.
Oh, yeah. Another reason why the state shouldn't get involved in stuff like that.
But he said, quote, to me, the important part of this story is the fact that the bit license contains a safe harbor that said as long as you were in by a set date, you were able to continue operations, and there was ample warning to pull out of New York. But what's that going to do except just completely make it impossible for startups?
Yeah. Not to mention that kind of sounds like the social contract. Oh, if you don't like something, then go away.
Yeah. Well, they are going away. That's the point.
Yeah, that's actually a reason why an increase in taxes and regulation doesn't work and why it often leads to net loss. It's not because people are worming their way out of the system, it's because they're just packing up and leaving.
So all of that makes the state of New York this week's biggest Bogon emitter. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv. And now let's enucleate this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And this week it goes to someone else who apparently thinks the Catch-22 was an instruction manual. Judge Amanda Sammons, who, get this, barred defendants from entering her courtroom, and when she finally let them in, arrested them for being late.
Okay, that is fucking pathetic. That's stupid. You know what this kind of reminds me of? It reminds me of this one cartoon where they're going to school and they get intercepted by the hall monitor, and the hall monitor says, "Why are you outside of class without a hall pass?" And he's like, "The bell hasn't rung, so I'm not late for school." And then the hall monitor deliberately blocks their pass so they can't get in. Then the bell rings, and then he writes a note saying, "Yep, you're late for class. You don't have a hall pass." That's what it's like.
Oh, yeah. So the Knoxville News-Sentinel did an investigation into Sammons' practice, and her practice is to bar entry from anyone while she's going through her docket. And they found more than half a dozen instances in which Sammons ordered defendants arrested after being made late by this policy. One of them was Suzanne Webb, and they go into her story into a little bit of detail. She was barred from entering the Sessions Court and then arrested for being late. The Tennessee Supreme Court has repeatedly said that the state's adult courtrooms and hearings are open to the public at all times. In order to close a courtroom to the public, one of the parties involved in the case has to request a closure, has to provide evidence for the need for closure, and then the judge can decide.
Yep, this goes to show that judges are just politicians in robes.
So the bailiffs locked the doors, and the News-Sentinel confronted Sammons. Sammons denied ordering the doors locked, saying, "Oh, the bailiffs misunderstood. They were just to simply bar entry, not locking the doors." Like that makes a real big difference.
Yeah, it's the same difference.
But she wasn't able to give them any legal authority she has to do that, and since she said that, the bailiffs stopped locking the doors, but continued to block entry based on her orders. And so this happened to Webb when she arrived. She actually arrived before 9 a.m. She was early for a hearing in a misdemeanor vandalism case. She had already posted bond. She said, quote, "My sister dropped me off. I was in the building and an officer was scanning my purse. They said the door was locked. They said I could not go in because she was sounding the docket." And so then she finishes the docket. They finally let her in. She sits down. She reads a book to pass the time, waiting for her name to be called. So, quote, "She called my name. She asked why I was late." And she explained why. Quote, "She said, 'That's no excuse.' She said, 'You're going to jail. You violated bond.'"
Really, there's no way she can possibly defend this, because here's the thing. If she's deliberately doing it, that's scumbaggish of her. And second of all, if she legitimately, doesn't realize what she's doing, then that just shows she's incompetent as a judge.
Well, here's the way it happened. This is interesting. Sammons set her a bond of $422.50 to be paid in cash, which is the amount she would owe in restitution and court costs if she was convicted. And then later on, Sammons agreed to drop the vandalism charge in exchange for forfeiture of the cash bond. So as long as you get the money...
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Forgiven, dropped from the court record, but we still get the moolah.
It kind of reminds me of this one thing I saw when it comes to speeding tickets, where police officers were known to give speeding tickets, for people, doing minor things like running stop signs and all that are not coming to a complete stop. Now, the tickets themselves are only $10, but the problem is that they go on your record, so often what they'll do is that they'll say, "But I don't want the points on my car insurance because then I'll have to pay a lot more money for my car insurance," and they'll say, "Well, here's the deal. If you give us $100 and plead to impeding traffic, we won't put it on your record."
How is this not extortion?
Yeah, I know.
Someone explain that to me.
Yeah, John Stossel was interviewing some people, and one guy flat out said if anyone else was doing this besides the county, they'd be arrested for money extortion.
The funny thing is, on the date of Webb's last court appearance, Sammons was late. I noticed that in school. They cite you as being tardy if you're 2 seconds after the bell running into the door, and yet at your school, did any of the school functions start on time?
There were times where the teacher, was either not there or they were at their desk just doing stuff even after the bell clearly rung, and they weren't even starting the lesson yet. There wasn't even instructions on the board saying, "I'm busy, so just read chapters after that." It looked like they either were not prepared or were just not paying attention.
But even formal stuff like, the pep rallies and a lot of the assemblies they make you go to, and it's supposed to start at 1 o'clock and it ends up starting at 1:20 or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
But I really don't get what goes through some people's heads.
Yeah.
What is she thinking?
Yeah, like I said, she's either a scumbag who's abusing her power just because she can, or she's a judge who's just completely incompetent.
But no matter which way it is, how could we have named anyone other than Judge Amanda Sammons this week's Idiot Extraordinaire? Well, that wraps up this Shut Up, You Little Weasel edition of the Bogosity podcast. Come join the discussion at forum.bogosity.tv and feel free to join in by sending a question, statement, news article, or rant in text or audio to podcast@bogosity.tv. This podcast depends on you to keep going, so please donate using the links on the website or the QR codes on the YouTube video. You can also become a patron at patreon.bogosity.tv and get the podcast and YouTube videos early and without ads or promos. Thank you for listening, and thanks again to Chris Hangartner for joining me.
It was nice to be back, Shane.
Until next time, here's a quote from Robert Higgs. The similarity of arguments against the abolition of slavery and arguments against the abolition of government as we know it should shake the faith of all Americans who still labor under the misconception that ours is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. From where I stand, it looks distressingly like an institutional complex that rests on the same shaky intellectual foundations as slavery. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.
Want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.